The blizzard struck with such fury that Henry Wallace barely saw the girl collapsed in the snow until his horse nearly trampled her frozen form just outside his cabin in the Nebraska wilderness, 3 miles from Kearney, in the bitter winter of 1878. He dismounted immediately, his boots crunching through the deep powder, and knelt beside what he first thought might be a bundle of furs abandoned on the trail. But then he saw the dark hair spreading across the white ground like spilled ink, and the delicate brown hand clutching a torn blanket. She was Apache, he could tell from her clothing and the beadwork on what remained of her doeskin dress. She could not have been more than 18 or 19 years old, and she was barely breathing. Henry did not hesitate despite the stories that circulated through town about conflicts between settlers and the native tribes. He saw only a young woman dying in the snow, and his conscience would not allow him to leave her there. At 24 years old, he had spent the last 3 years alone in this cabin after his parents died of fever, working his small ranch and keeping to himself. He had grown accustomed to solitude, even preferred it, but he was not heartless. He gathered her into his arms, alarmed at how light she felt, how cold her skin was even through her clothes. Her lips were blue, and frost clung to her eyelashes. He carried her quickly to his cabin, kicking the door open and bringing her inside where the fire still burned in the stone hearth. He laid her on his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and began working to warm her before the cold claimed her life entirely. Henry removed her wet moccasins and the frozen blanket, then covered her with every dry blanket and fur he owned. He built up the fire until the cabin was almost too hot, then heated water and tried to get her to drink. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, and for hours he was not certain she would survive the night. He had seen enough death in his years to recognize when someone was close to that final edge. But as the night wore on and he kept vigil beside the bed, checking her breathing, warming her hands between his own, he noticed color returning to her face. Near dawn, she began to shiver violently, which he knew was a good sign. Her body was fighting back. He wrapped her more securely and spooned warm broth between her lips, and finally, when the winter sun rose pale and distant beyond his window, she opened her eyes. They were dark and beautiful, filled first with confusion, then with fear. She tried to sit up and cried out in pain. Henry raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy now," he said softly. "You are safe. I found you in the snow. You were nearly frozen to death." She stared at him, understanding in her eyes even if she did not speak. She looked around the cabin, taking in her surroundings, then looked down at herself beneath the blankets. Henry understood her concern. "I only removed your wet things," he said, feeling heat rise to his face. "You would have died if I had not gotten you warm. Your other clothes are drying by the fire." She nodded slowly, then spoke in accented but clear English. "Water." He brought her water and she drank deeply. Then she lay back against the pillow, exhausted from even that small effort. He watched her carefully, seeing the pain she tried to hide. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Besides the cold, my ankle," she whispered. "I fell running from the soldiers. I ran for 2 days, got lost in the storm." Henry's jaw tightened. He had heard about the army patrols forcing Apache families from their lands, driving them toward the reservations regardless of the season or conditions. It was a brutal policy, and he had never agreed with it, though he kept his opinions to himself in town where such sentiments could make a man unwelcome. "Let me look," he said. When she nodded permission, he carefully examined her ankle through the blanket. It was badly swollen but did not appear broken. He wrapped it tightly and elevated it on a folded blanket. "You need to rest and stay off this for a while, and you need food to get your strength back." "My family," she said, her voice breaking. We were traveling to find my mother's people. The soldiers came. Everyone scattered. I do not know where they went. What is your name? Henry asked gently. Winona, she said. Winona Songbird. I am Henry Wallace, he told her. And you can stay here until you are well enough to travel. I will not turn you out into the cold. Suspicion flickered in her eyes, and he could not blame her for it. She had probably experienced enough cruelty from white men to last a lifetime. But she was in no position to refuse his help, and somewhere beneath the suspicion, he saw a flicker of gratitude. Over the following days, Henry cared for Winona as best he knew how. He gave her his bed and made himself a pallet near the fire. He cooked simple meals of venison stew and cornbread, heated water for her to wash with, and kept the cabin warm against the brutal cold that continued outside. The blizzard that had nearly killed her settled into a pattern of steady snowfall that showed no signs of stopping. They were effectively trapped together, and Henry found himself grateful for the company even under such strange circumstances. Winona was wary at first, watching his every movement with alert eyes, keeping the blankets pulled close as though they were armor. But Henry gave her space and treated her with consistent respect, and gradually she began to relax. Her ankle was healing well, though she would need weeks before she could walk properly on it. She began to sit up in bed, then to insist on moving to the chair by the fire so Henry could have his bed back. He refused at first, but she was stubborn, and eventually he relented. They began to talk more. Winona told him about her life, about growing up in the mountains with her tribe, about the old ways that were disappearing as more settlers pushed west. Her father was a respected leader, and she had been educated both in tribal traditions and in English by a missionary teacher who had lived with them for several years. That teacher had been kind, she said, not like the others who came only to take. She taught me to read, Winona said one evening as they sat by the fire. Snow whispered against the windows. She brought books and showed me words. My father was angry at first, but then he saw that knowing the white man's language could help our people. I became a translator sometimes when traders came. Henry listened, fascinated by her stories of a world he had never known despite living his whole life in this territory. I am sorry for what has happened to your people, he said. It is not right, forcing families from their homes. She looked at him with surprise. Most white men do not think such things. Most white men do not think much at all, Henry replied with a slight smile. They just do what they are told or what benefits them. I try to think for myself. That is rare, Winona said, and he thought he detected the hint of a smile on her own lips. As the days passed into weeks, the cabin felt less like a prison and more like a refuge for both of them. The winter raged outside, but inside they created a small pocket of warmth and unexpected companionship. Henry taught Winona to play checkers with pieces he carved from wood during the long evenings. She taught him words in Apache and told him stories from her people's history. They cooked together, with Winona showing him how to prepare certain wild roots and herbs she had carried in a pouch on her belt, the only possession she had kept through her ordeal. Henry found himself watching her when she was not looking, noticing the graceful way she moved despite her injury, the intelligence that shone in her eyes, the sound of her rare laughter like water over stones. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to share space with another person, to have someone to talk to in the evenings, to wake up and see another human face. He had told himself he preferred solitude, but now he wondered if he had simply been protecting himself from more loss after his parents died. Winona seemed to be experiencing a similar transformation. She smiled more often, and the guarded fear in her eyes faded. She began to tease him gently about his cooking, or the way he sometimes talked to his horse, as if the animal could understand complex conversation. She mended his shirts with neat stitches and added small decorative patterns in colored thread she made from plant dyes, despite his protests that she did not need to repay him. "It gives me something to do," she said. "I am not used to sitting still for so long." One evening in late January, nearly 6 weeks after he had found her, they sat by the fire after supper. The wind howled outside, but the cabin was warm and filled with the smell of wood smoke and the rabbit stew they had shared. Henry was whittling a new set of checkers pieces, and Winona was sewing a tear in one of his blankets. "Can I ask you something?" Winona said suddenly. "Of course. Why do you live alone out here? A man your age, you should have a wife, a family." Henry was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I suppose I never found the right woman," he said finally. "And after my parents died, I did not feel much like socializing in town. People there, they are fine folks mostly, but they do not understand wanting something more than just getting by. They think I am strange for reading books and asking questions about how things work. I guess I got comfortable being alone. And now?" Winona asked, her eyes on her sewing but her voice carrying a note of something Henry could not quite identify. "Now I think maybe I was just waiting," he said, the words surprising him as he spoke them. He looked up and found her watching him, and the moment stretched between them like something tangible. Winona looked away first, her cheeks coloring. "The storm is lasting a long time," she said, changing the subject, but her voice was not quite steady. "Yes," Henry agreed, his heart beating harder than it should. "The longest winter I can remember." That night, lying on his pallet by the fire, Henry stared at the ceiling and admitted to himself what he had been trying to ignore for weeks. He was falling in love with Winona. It was impossible and complicated and probably foolish, but it was true. She was unlike any woman he had ever known, with her quiet strength and sharp mind, her resilience and her gentleness. She had survived things that would have broken others, and yet she still had kindness in her heart. She challenged him and comforted him and made him want to be better than he was. But he did not know how she felt, and he was afraid to ask. She was here because she had no choice, because she was injured and stranded by the weather. When spring came and she was healed, she would leave to find her family. Why would she want to stay with him? What could he offer her? He was just a lonely rancher with a small cabin and modest prospects, and beyond that, there was the harsh reality of the world they lived in. A white man and an Apache woman together would face hatred and danger from both sides. He had no right to ask her to endure that, even if she wanted to. But the heart does not always listen to reason. Winona lay in the bed across the cabin, equally awake, thinking similar thoughts. She had not expected to feel this way about Henry. When she first woke in his cabin, she had been terrified, certain he would harm her or turn her over to the soldiers. But he had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. He treated her as an equal, listened when she spoke, seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and stories. He was intelligent and thoughtful, and his hands were gentle when he tended her ankle or handed her a cup of tea. She caught herself watching him throughout the day, noticing the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over his work, the strength in his shoulders when he carried wood, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She felt safe with him, truly safe for the first time in months. But more than that, she felt seen. He looked at her and saw who she really was, not just an Apache or a woman, but Winona, a whole person with value and dignity. She knew she was falling in love with him, and it frightened her. Her life was so uncertain. She did not know if her family had survived, where they were, if she would ever see them again. And even if she stayed with Henry, what kind of life could they have? The world would not accept them. But when she imagined leaving him, imagined walking away when spring came and never seeing him again, the pain was sharp and real. February brought a brief warming, and the snow melted enough that Henry could make his way to his barn and check on his cattle and horses. He had been going out every few days throughout the winter, but it was easier now, and Winona insisted on coming with him, leaning on a crutch he had made. She was eager to be outside after so many weeks indoors. The air was crisp and clean, and the sun was bright on the remaining snow. Winona breathed deeply, her face turned up to the light. Henry watched her, thinking she had never looked more beautiful. "I have missed the sky," she said. "Being outside." "I know what you mean," Henry said. "I love this land despite everything. It can be harsh, but it is honest. It does not pretend to be something it is not." They walked slowly to the barn, where his 3 horses and small herd of cattle were waiting. Winona helped him distribute hay and check water, moving carefully on her healing ankle. She was good with the animals, he noticed, approaching them with calm confidence. One of his horses, a sorrel mare that was usually skittish, walked right up to Winona and nuzzled her hand. "She likes you," Henry said. "She does not take to most people." "Animals can sense intentions," Winona said, stroking the mare's nose. "She knows I mean no harm." As they walked back to the cabin, Henry found himself walking closer to her than necessary, ready to catch her if she stumbled. Their hands brushed once, and he felt an electric jolt run through him. Winona looked up at him quickly, and he saw the same awareness in her eyes. Back inside, as she settled into her chair and he built up the fire, the air between them felt charged with things unsaid. Henry knew he should speak, should tell her how he felt, but fear held his tongue. He busied himself with tasks around the cabin, very aware of her presence. Finally, as evening fell and they prepared their meal together, Winona spoke. "Henry," she said, and something in her voice made him turn to face her fully. "I need to tell you something." His heart raced. "What is it?" She took a breath. "When spring comes and I am fully healed, I will need to try to find my family, but I do not want to leave." The last words came out in a rush, and she looked down at her hands. "These weeks here with you have been the happiest of my life, even though we are just surviving. I feel more at home here than I have ever felt anywhere, and I think it is because of you, because of who you are. I think I have feelings for you that I should not have." Henry crossed the cabin in 3 strides and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Winona, look at me." She raised her eyes, and he saw tears there, and hope and fear. "I have been trying to find the courage to tell you the same thing," he said. "I have fallen in love with you. I do not know how it happened so fast, but I know it is true. When I think about you leaving, it feels like losing the sun. This cabin was just a place I existed before. Now it is home because you are here. You love me," she whispered. "I love you," he confirmed. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love your mind and your spirit. I love the way you laugh and the way you tell stories and the way you look at the world. I love you, Winona Songbird, and if you will stay, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Henry Wallace. I have never felt this way about anyone. You have given me more than shelter. You have given me hope again." He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her face, and then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, tender and full of promise, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I know it will not be easy," Henry said. "People in town, they might not understand, and your people might not accept me, but I do not care. I want to build a life with you if you want that too." "I want it," Winona said firmly. "I want it more than anything. We will face whatever comes together." They sat together by the fire that night, Winona in her chair and Henry on the floor beside her, her hand in his, making plans and dreams. Henry talked about expanding his ranch, about building a bigger cabin if she wanted. Winona talked about planting a garden in the spring, about the vegetables and herbs her people grew. They talked about the future with a tentative joy, both aware of the obstacles ahead but choosing to focus on the hope. As February turned to March, their relationship deepened. They were careful with each other, respectful of boundaries, but the love between them was obvious in every gesture and glance. Henry held her hand as they sat by the fire in the evenings. Winona kissed his cheek when he brought her morning tea. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's hearts and minds. Winona's ankle healed fully, and she began to take over more of the household tasks, though Henry insisted they share the work equally. They cooked together, cleaned together, cared for the animals together. They were building a partnership, a life, even as they waited for spring to fully arrive and reveal what challenges it might bring. In mid-March, the snow began to melt in earnest. The prairie started to emerge from its white blanket, brown and dormant, but showing the first hints of green. The stream near Henry's cabin, frozen solid for months, began to flow again with a cheerful burbling that they could hear even inside. Birds began to return, and the air smelled of wet earth and growing things. Henry took Winona into Kearney one day to buy supplies. He had warned her that people might stare or say unkind things, but she held her head high as they walked down the main street together. People did stare, and Henry heard whispers, but no one confronted them directly. He bought flour and sugar and coffee and a length of pretty blue fabric that he gave to Winona. "For a new dress," he said. "If you want it." She clutched the fabric, her eyes bright. "It is beautiful, thank you." At the general store, the owner, a man named Mr. Peterson, was polite but cool. Henry had known him for years, but the man's attitude had shifted noticeably. As they left, Peterson called after them. "Wallace, you know that is not going to be easy for you, keeping company with her kind." Henry turned back, his jaw tight. "Her kind? You mean a kind, intelligent, hard-working woman? That is exactly what I want, Peterson. Good day." He took Winona's arm and they walked out together, both of them holding their heads high despite the stares that followed them. Back in the wagon, Winona was quiet. "Are you sorry?" she asked finally. "That you are with me, it will make your life harder." "I have never been less sorry about anything," Henry said firmly. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Whatever we face together. Remember?" She smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "Together," she agreed. But as March wore on, Winona began to grow restless. Henry could see the worry in her eyes, the way she stared out at the prairie as if searching for something. He knew she was thinking about her family, wondering if they had survived where they were. He had known from the beginning that this moment would come, but it still hurt to see her pulling away, even just emotionally. One evening as they sat after supper, Winona spoke. "Henry, I need to try to find my family. I know I said I want to stay with you, and I do, but I need to know if they are alive, if they are searching for me. I owe them that much." Henry had been dreading this conversation but knew it was necessary. "I understand," he said, "and I will help you. We can ride out, search the areas where you think they might be, or we can ask around town if anyone has heard news of Apache families in the area." "You would come with me?" she asked, surprised. "Of course," Henry said. "Do you think I would let you go alone? We are in this together, Winona." "I meant what I said." Relief flooded her face. "I was afraid you would think I was choosing them over you." "You are not choosing," Henry said, taking her hands. "You are honoring your family and your past. That is part of who you are, and I love all of who you are. We will find them if they are alive, and then we will figure out what comes next." They began to prepare for the journey. Henry gathered supplies and checked his horses. Winona described the area where she had been when the soldiers came, and Henry found it on his map. It was about 40 miles north, near the Platte River. It would take them several days to search the area properly, but the weather was mild enough now that they could camp if needed. But before they could leave, fate intervened. On the first day of April, Henry was out behind the cabin chopping wood when he heard Winona call out from inside. Something in her voice made him drop the axe and run. He burst through the door to find her standing at the window, her face pale, staring out at the prairie to the south. "What is it?" he asked, moving to her side. "Riders," she said. "Apache riders." Henry looked and saw them, perhaps a dozen men on horseback moving steadily toward the cabin. His hand instinctively went to the rifle that hung above the door, but Winona grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. "Look at the lead rider. That is my father." Henry looked more carefully and saw that the man at the front of the group sat his horse with natural authority, his long hair streaked with gray, his face weathered and strong. As they drew closer, Henry could see the resemblance to Winona in his features. "What do we do?" Henry asked. "We go out to meet them," Winona said. "Together. You are with me, remember?" Henry nodded and followed her outside. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face calm. He had faced dangerous situations before, and he was not going to show fear now, especially not in front of Winona's father. The riders stopped about 20 yards from the cabin, and the lead man dismounted. He was tall and lean, dressed in traditional clothing decorated with intricate beadwork. His eyes swept over the cabin, over Henry, and finally landed on Winona. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Winona ran forward. "Father!" The man's stern expression cracked, and he opened his arms. Winona embraced him tightly, and Henry saw the man's shoulders shake with emotion. The other riders remained mounted, watching Henry with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. After a long moment, Winona and her father separated, and she led him toward Henry. "Father, this is Henry Wallace. He saved my life. I would have frozen to death in the snow if he had not found me." The man looked at Henry with penetrating dark eyes. "I am Winona Songbird," he said in English. "You have my daughter." "I sheltered your daughter," Henry said carefully. "She was injured and lost. I gave her a place to heal. She has been free to leave any time she wished." "And yet she is still here," Chayton observed. His tone was neutral, but Henry sensed the challenge beneath it. "She is here because she chooses to be," Henry said. He felt Winona take his hand, and he squeezed it gently. "We have become close. I have fallen in love with your daughter, and she has told me she loves me. I know this is not what you would have chosen for her, but I swear to you that I will protect her and honor her for the rest of my life if she will have me." Chayton's eyes flickered between them, taking in their joined hands the way they stood together. "You are a white man," he said. "Your people have brought nothing but death and suffering to mine." "I am aware of the injustices," Henry said, "and I am ashamed of what my people have done. But I am not all white men, just as you are not all Apache. We are individuals, and I love your daughter as an individual, not as a symbol or a conquest. I love her for who she is." Chayton was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Winona and spoke in Apache. Henry did not understand the words, but he could hear the emotion in them, the pain and relief and confusion. Winona answered in the same language, her voice strong and clear. The conversation went on for several minutes, and Henry waited, trying to look respectful and non-threatening. Finally, Chayton turned back to Henry. "My daughter tells me you have treated her with respect and kindness. She tells me she loves you and wants to stay with you. She also tells me that you came to her as an equal, that you have shared your life with her and listened to her words as if they had value." "They do have value," Henry said. She has the wisest heart of anyone I have ever known. A slight smile touched Chayton's lips. You speak well. But words are easy. I must know if your intentions are true. He paused, then said, I have a proposal for you, Henry Wallace. I am listening, Henry said. Spend 1 month with us, Chayton said. Come to our camp, learn our ways. If after that time you still wish to marry my daughter and she still wishes to marry you, I will give my blessing. But you must understand what you are asking her to give up, what it means to be Apache. You must respect her heritage even as she would be entering your world. Henry looked at Winona, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. What do you think? He asked her. Do you want me to do this? Only if you want to, she said. I do not want you to feel forced. I am not forced, Henry said. If this is what I must do to prove myself to your father, to show him I am serious about you and our future, then I will gladly do it. I want to learn about where you come from, who your people are. It is part of you, so it is important to me. Winona smiled, and he saw tears of happiness in her eyes. She turned to her father and spoke in Apache, clearly accepting his proposal. Chayton nodded, looking satisfied. Then it is settled. We leave tomorrow. Pack what you need for a month. We will return here at the end to hear your decision. The rest of that day was a flurry of activity. The Apache set up camp near the cabin, and Winona helped Henry prepare for the journey. He packed clothes and a few personal items, made arrangements for his animals with a neighboring rancher who owed him a favor. He left the cabin secured as best he could, hoping no one would take advantage of his absence. That night, he and Winona sat outside under the stars, the Apache camp visible in the distance. Are you nervous? She asked. A little, Henry admitted. I want to make a good impression. I want your father to see that I am worthy of you. You are already worthy, Winona said, but I am glad you will learn about my people. It will help you understand me better. I want to understand everything about you, Henry said, pulling her close. You are my future, Winona. I will do whatever it takes to build a life with you. She kissed him softly. And you are mine. The next morning they set out with Chayton and his men. Henry rode beside Winona, very aware of the eyes on them, the way the other Apache watched him with varying degrees of suspicion. But he kept his head up and focused on the journey ahead. They traveled for 3 days, heading north into rougher country. The Apache camp was in a hidden valley where a small river provided water, and the surrounding hills offered protection and game. Henry was impressed by the location and the organization of the camp. There were perhaps 30 families, living in hide lodges and wickiups. Children played in the open areas, women worked at various tasks, and men tended horses or worked on tools and weapons. Henry was given his own small shelter near Chayton's lodge. Winona would stay with the women in her family's lodge, a propriety that Henry respected even though he already missed her constant presence. He understood that this separation was part of the test, proving he could respect their customs and boundaries. The first few days were difficult. Henry spoke no Apache beyond the few words Winona had taught him, and few of the tribe spoke English. He felt isolated and watched, aware that he was an outsider and possibly unwelcome. But he tried his best, offering to help with tasks, observing carefully, and showing respect to everyone he met. Chayton began teaching him directly, showing him how the Apache tracked game, how they used the land sustainably, taking only what was needed. Henry was fascinated by the depth of knowledge Chayton possessed about the natural world. He could read signs in the earth that Henry would never have noticed, could predict weather changes by watching animal behavior, could identify hundreds of plants and their uses. Your people think we are savages, Chayton said one day as they tracked deer through the hills. But we have lived in harmony with this land for generations beyond counting. We do not take more than we need. We thank the spirits for what is given. We understand that all life is connected. I do not think you are savages, Henry said. I think you have wisdom that my people have forgotten or never knew. I am grateful you are willing to teach me. Chayton looked at him appraisingly. You are different from most white men I have met. You listen more than you talk. That is rare. My father taught me that a man has 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, Henry said. He should listen twice as much as he speaks. Chayton smiled. Your father was wise. As the days passed, Henry began to find his place in the camp. He helped with the hunting, proving himself a decent shot and a hard worker. He learned to prepare hides, to build fires that produced little smoke, to move quietly through the forest. The children of the camp lost their initial shyness and began to follow him around, giggling when he tried to speak Apache words with his terrible accent. Winona taught him in the evenings, sitting outside his shelter where they could be seen by anyone, maintaining propriety. She showed him sign language that many tribes used to communicate across language barriers. She taught him songs and stories, the history of her people, the spiritual beliefs that guided their lives. We believe that all things have spirit, she explained one evening. The rocks, the trees, the animals, the water, we are all connected in the web of life. When you harm one part, you harm all parts. When you honor one part, you honor all parts. That makes sense to me, Henry said. More sense than a lot of what I was taught in church, to be honest. The preacher always talked about man having dominion over the earth, but this idea of being part of it, not just ruling it, feels more right somehow. You have a good heart, Henry, Winona said softly. That is why I love you. And you have an extraordinary heart, he replied. Which is why I love you. Near the end of the 2nd week, Henry faced a significant challenge. A young warrior named Takoda, who clearly resented Henry's presence, challenged him to a fight. It was not uncommon, Winona explained nervously. Warriors tested each other to establish respect. It would not be to the death, but it would be painful. Henry accepted the challenge, knowing he had no choice without losing all credibility. They fought with bare hands in a circle of observers, and it was brutal. Takoda was skilled and fast, and Henry took several hard hits before he figured out the other man's patterns. But Henry had grown up rough, working ranches and surviving on the frontier. He was strong and stubborn, and he did not give up. The fight lasted nearly 30 minutes before Chayton called a stop. Both men were bloodied and breathing hard, neither having clearly won. Takoda looked at Henry with new respect and nodded once. Henry nodded back. After that, the attitude in the camp shifted noticeably. He had proven he was not soft, that he could hold his own. Winona tended his wounds that evening, her touch gentle but her eyes bright with pride. You did well, she said. Takoda is one of our best warriors. That you fought him to a draw is impressive. I am going to feel this for a week, Henry groaned, but he was smiling. But I think it was worth it. As the 3rd week began, Henry felt more comfortable in the camp. He had learned enough Apache to have basic conversations. He knew the names of most of the people and the structure of the community. He participated in a hunting party that brought down an elk, and he was honored to share in the feast afterward. He sat by the fire and listened to the stories the elders told, and he tried to understand the complex spiritual beliefs that guided Apache life. He also saw the challenges his people's expansion had brought to the tribe. They were struggling to find game as more settlers moved into the territory. The army patrols kept them moving, never allowing them to stay in one place long enough to really establish themselves. Children were hungry more often than they should be. Old people looked tired beyond their years. One evening, Henry sat with Chayton outside his lodge watching the sun set over the valley. What will you do? Henry asked. "How will you survive if things continue as they are?" Chayton was silent for a long time. "We will adapt or we will die," he said finally. "Those are the only choices. Some of our people have gone to the reservations. They say it is better to live in confinement than to die free. Others refuse and continue to fight, but the army is too strong. We cannot win a war of weapons." He paused, then added, "That is why I am here, why I brought my family this far north. I am trying to find a middle path, a way to maintain our traditions while also surviving in this new world. If Winona and I marry," Henry said carefully, "she would be welcome to bring her family to live near us. I have land, enough to support more people. Your knowledge of the land could help my ranch prosper. We could live together, not apart. I know it is not what you would have chosen for her, but maybe it could be a version of the middle path you are looking for." Chayton looked at him sharply. "You would allow that, Apache living on your land?" "It would not be allowing," Henry said. "It would be family. If I marry Winona, you become my family. Family helps each other. You have taught me so much these past weeks. Imagine what we could accomplish working together instead of against each other or just separately." Chayton studied him for a long moment. "You surprise me, Henry Wallace. Most white men want to take from us, not share with us." "I am not most white men," Henry said. "And if we are going to build a future in this territory, we need to find ways to live together. Why not start with our own families?" "Why not indeed?" Chayton murmured, looking thoughtful. The fourth week flew by. Henry had fallen into the rhythm of camp life, and he found he enjoyed many aspects of it. The sense of community was strong, everyone looking out for each other. The connection to the land was profound, and he had learned more in these weeks about tracking and survival than he had in years on his own. But he also missed his cabin, his privacy, and most of all, having Winona to himself. They had spent time together, but always under watchful eyes, never alone. He longed to hold her properly, to kiss her without an audience, to talk freely about their future. He hoped that, after this trial period, they would be allowed to marry and begin their life together. On the last evening of the month, Chayton called a council. The entire tribe gathered around a large fire in the center of camp. Henry was brought to stand in the circle of firelight, with Winona beside him. He could feel his heart pounding but kept his expression calm. Chayton spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the gathering. Henry caught some of the words but not all. When Chayton finished speaking, there was a murmur from the assembled tribe. Then several of the elders spoke, and Takota stood and said something that made several people nod. Finally, Chayton turned to Henry and switched to English. "We have discussed your time with us. The elders say you have shown respect and a willingness to learn. The warriors say you have courage and strength. The women say you work hard and do not complain. The children say you are kind and make them laugh." He paused, and Henry thought he saw a twinkle in the older man's eye. "My daughter says she loves you and will marry no other." Winona squeezed his hand and Henry squeezed back, not daring to hope yet. "I have made my decision," Chayton continued. "You have proven yourself worthy of my daughter. You have shown that you respect our ways and that you are willing to be part of both worlds. If you still wish to marry Winona, you have my blessing." Relief and joy flooded through Henry. He turned to Winona and saw tears streaming down her face as she smiled. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I still wish to marry her, more than anything." The camp erupted in cheers and ululating cries of celebration. People crowded around them, offering congratulations. Henry found himself embraced by warriors he had sparred with, patted on the back by elders, pulled into dances he did not know. Winona was surrounded by women, all talking at once, and she kept looking over at him with radiant happiness. Chayton pulled Henry aside amidst the celebration. "I have another proposal for you," he said. "What is that?" Henry asked. "You offered to let my family live near your land. I am taking you up on that offer. My people cannot survive much longer running from the army. But if we settle near your ranch, we have a white man who can speak for us, who can claim we are working his land. It might give us protection. And in return, we help you build your ranch into something more prosperous. We work together, two families becoming one community." Henry felt emotion tighten his throat. "I would be honored," he said, "truly honored." "Then it is settled," Chayton said. He clasped Henry's forearm in a warrior's grip. "You are my son now. Welcome to the family." The celebration lasted long into the night. There was food and dancing, stories and songs. Henry and Winona were rarely more than a few feet apart, always reaching for each other's hands, smiling at each other with undisguised joy. Finally, near midnight, the crowd began to disperse to their lodges. Chayton approached them one more time. Traditionally, there would be a waiting period before the wedding. But you two have already waited long enough, I think. We will perform the ceremony tomorrow at sunset if that is your wish. "It is," Henry and Winona said at the same time, then laughed. That night, Henry lay in his shelter unable to sleep. Tomorrow he would marry the woman he loved. Tomorrow he would officially become part of this tribe, this family. Tomorrow his new life would truly begin. He had come to this camp a month ago as an outsider, uncertain and alone. He was leaving as part of a community, loved and accepted, with a future brighter than anything he had dared imagine. The next day was a blur of preparation. The women took Winona away to prepare her for the ceremony, and the men helped Henry make himself presentable. Takoda even offered him a traditional shirt decorated with quillwork, which Henry accepted gratefully. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, everyone gathered again in the central area of the camp. Winona emerged from her lodge, and Henry's breath caught. She wore a white doeskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork in blue and yellow, the colors of the sky and the sun. Her long dark hair was loose down her back, adorned with feathers and wildflowers. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was conducted by one of the elders, a woman named Chenoa who was considered a spiritual leader. She spoke in Apache, but Winona quietly translated for Henry. They stood before the fire while Chenoa talked about the joining of two paths, two hearts, two families. She tied their wrists together with a braided cord, symbolizing their union. "What you bind here today cannot be easily broken," Chenoa said through Winona's translation. "You are now one person walking two paths, seeing with four eyes, working with four hands. You are stronger together than apart. Honor each other, respect each other, love each other all your days." "We will," Henry and Winona said together. Then Chayton stepped forward. "As Winona's father, I give her to you, Henry Wallace. Treat her as the precious gift she is. And Winona, take this man as your husband. Build a life together that honors both your people and his." The gathered tribe erupted in celebration once more. Henry was finally allowed to kiss his wife properly, and he did so, pouring all his love and joy into that kiss. When they broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "Hello, husband," Winona said. "Hello, wife," Henry replied. "I love you. I love you too, now and always." The celebration that followed was even more enthusiastic than the previous nights. But eventually, Chayton announced that the newlyweds would be given privacy in a special lodge that had been prepared for them. Henry and Winona were led to a beautifully decorated wickiup on the edge of camp, away from the others. Inside were soft furs and blankets, food and water, everything they might need. Once they were alone, truly alone for the first time in a month, Henry pulled Winona into his arms. "I have missed you," he said. I have missed holding you like this." "And I have missed you," Winona said, reaching up to touch his face. "This has been the longest month of my life." "But we made it," Henry said. "We are married now. Nothing can separate us." They spent their wedding night learning each other, celebrating their union in the most intimate way, whispering love and promises in the darkness. Henry had never felt more complete, more at home in his own skin. Winona was his wife now, his partner, his love, and he was hers. The next morning, they emerged to find preparations already underway for the move to Henry's ranch. Chayton had decided that the entire band would relocate, about 40 people total. It would take several days to travel with everyone, especially the elders and children, but the tribe was used to moving. They packed their belongings efficiently, took down their lodges, and prepared their horses. The journey back to Kearney took 5 days. Henry and Winona rode side by side, often reaching out to touch each other, still marveling at the fact that they were married. The rest of the tribe treated Henry as one of their own now, and he found himself falling into easy conversation with people who had been strangers just a month before. When they finally reached Henry's land, he was relieved to see his cabin still standing, undisturbed. The neighbor who had been watching his animals had done a good job, and his horses whinnied greeting when they saw him. But now came the bigger task of helping the entire band settle on his property. Henry owned nearly 200 acres, much of it unused. There was plenty of room for the Apache to set up their camp near the creek that ran through his property. The location offered good water, shelter from wind, and enough space for everyone. Chayton immediately began organizing the camp setup while Henry went to check on his cabin. Inside, everything was as they had left it. But now this cabin would be shared with Winona permanently. Now it was the home they would build their life in together. Henry felt a swell of emotion as he looked around, imagining their future here. Winona came up behind him and slipped her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking this cabin is too small," Henry said. "I am thinking we need to build an addition. Maybe 2 rooms, one for us and one for children when they come, and we will need a bigger barn with all these people and horses. There is a lot of work to do." "Then we will do it together," Winona said. "All of us. That is what family does." Over the next few weeks, Henry's property transformed. The Apache set up their lodges in a neat arrangement near the creek. They built corrals for the horses and helped Henry construct a larger barn. Chayton and the other men hunted the surrounding land, always careful not to take too much, and they brought the meat to share with Henry and Winona as well as feeding their own families. The women, including Winona, planted a large garden using seeds Henry bought in town along with traditional crops the Apache had brought with them. They worked together, Apache and white techniques combining to create something new and better. Henry had been worried about how the people in Kearney would react to having an Apache band camped on his land. His worries were justified. Many townspeople were hostile, muttering about savages and threats. Some refused to do business with him. But others, particularly those who knew Henry well, were willing to give the situation a chance. The general store owner, Peterson, softened when he saw that the Apache were peaceful and actually helped Henry's ranch prosper. "I will admit I had my doubts, Wallace," Peterson said one day when Henry came in for supplies with Chayton. "But your father-in-law here knows his business. Heard you two brought down a buffalo last week and shared the meat with half the county." "We believe in community," Chayton said in his careful English. "Help each other, survive together." "Not a bad philosophy," Peterson admitted. Slowly, carefully, bridges began to build between the town and the Apache band. It was not easy, and there were still people who would never accept the situation. But Henry and Winona, along with Chayton and the more reasonable townspeople, kept working at it, proving through their actions that cooperation was possible. Summer came, hot and bright. The garden flourished under the combined care of all the women. The cattle Henry owned multiplied with the improved land management Chayton had taught him. Henry learned to work with rawhide and to craft tools the Apache way, and he taught several of the Apache men to read and write basic English, knowing it would help them navigate the white world they had to live in. Winona seemed to bloom in this new life. She was happy in a way Henry had never seen, surrounded by her people but also building a home with him. She sang as she worked, and her laughter was a constant music in their cabin. Henry fell more in love with her every day. In late summer, Winona began to feel ill in the mornings. At first she tried to hide it, but Henry noticed and worried. One of the elder women, Chenoa, examined her and came out with a knowing smile. "Your wife is with child," she told Henry. "You will be a father by spring." Henry was stunned, then overjoyed. He rushed into the cabin where Winona was resting and gathered her into his arms. "A baby, we are having a baby." "Yes," Winona said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "Are you happy?" "Happy, I am more than happy. I am blessed beyond measure," Henry said, kissing her soundly. "A child, our child. Part you, part me, part both our worlds. A bridge," Winona said softly, placing her hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child will be a bridge between our peoples." "The first of many," Henry agreed. The news spread through the camp quickly, and there was much celebration. A child born to Henry and Winona would be a symbol of the new community they were building, a sign of hope for the future. Chayton was particularly pleased, already planning how he would teach his grandchild all the old ways. As fall arrived and the air turned crisp, the community on Henry's land had fully established itself. The Apache lodges were weatherproof and comfortable. Food stores were ample for the coming winter. Relationships with the town were slowly improving. And Henry and Winona's cabin had received its addition, 2 new rooms built with help from the entire community. One evening in October, Henry and Winona sat on the porch they had built on the front of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Winona's pregnancy was starting to show, and Henry's hand rested protectively on the small swell of her belly. "Do you ever regret it?" Winona asked suddenly. "Your life was simpler before I came into it." "Simpler, maybe," Henry said, "but not better, not even close to better. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Winona. You and this baby and this family we have built. I was just existing before. Now I am living." "I feel the same way," Winona said, leaning against his shoulder. "That blizzard that nearly killed me led me to you. Sometimes the worst things bring us to the best places." "A wise woman once told me that all things are connected," Henry said. "I did not fully understand what she meant then, but I do now. Everything that happened, all the pain and struggle, it was all connected, all leading to this moment right here." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From the Apache camp, they could hear the sounds of evening activities, children being called to bed, the low murmur of adult conversation, someone singing softly. It was the sound of community, of family, of home. Winter came again, but this year it was different. Henry was not alone in his cabin, and the Apache camp nearby meant there was always help if needed. They all worked together to survive the cold months, sharing resources and knowledge. Henry taught the children to read by the fire in his cabin on the coldest days. The Apache taught him more of their language and their stories, and through it all, Winona grew round with their child, glowing with health and happiness. On a frigid night in late February, Winona went into labor. The women of the tribe took over, shooing Henry out of his own cabin. He paced in the snow outside, wrapped in a buffalo robe with Chayton beside him. "My first time, too," Chayton said with a slight smile. "When Winona was born, I was just as nervous as you. I wore a path in the snow just like you are doing now." "How long did it take?" Henry asked. "Every birth is different," Chayton said, "but you should prepare for a long night." It was indeed a long night. Henry could hear Winona's cries of pain, and every one of them pierced his heart. He wanted to go to her to help somehow, but Chenoa had been firm that men did not belong in the birthing place. So he waited and paced and prayed to every god he could think of, white and Apache, that Winona and the baby would be safe. Finally, as dawn was breaking pink and gold over the snow-covered prairie, a baby's cry rang out from the cabin. Henry's head snapped up and he moved toward the door, but Chenoa emerged first. "You have a son," she said with a smile. "A strong, healthy son, and your wife is tired but well." Henry pushed past her into the cabin. Winona lay on their bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when Henry approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "Our son," she said softly. "What should we name him?" Henry looked at the tiny person, his son, this miracle, and felt his heart expand to hold even more love than he had thought possible. "I was thinking, if you agree, we could give him names from both our peoples. Something that represents who he is, what he means." "I would like that," Winona said. "What do you suggest?" "How about Samuel for his white name after my father," Henry said. "And Yado for his Apache name. It means blue, like the sky that covers all of us, white and Apache alike." "Samuel Yado Wallace," Winona said, testing the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect." Henry leaned down and kissed his wife's forehead, then gently touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his finger with surprising strength, and Henry felt tears sting his eyes. "Hello, Samuel," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. You are so loved already." Over the following weeks, baby Samuel became the center of attention for the entire community. The Apache children were fascinated by the infant, bringing him gifts of carved toys and soft rabbit furs. The adults took turns helping Winona and Henry, bringing food, fetching water, teaching them the skills of new parents. Chayton was a doting grandfather, often found holding his grandson and singing traditional songs to him. As winter gave way to spring once more, Henry reflected on how much his life had changed in just over a year. Last spring, he had been alone, lonely, just going through the motions of existence. Now he had a wife he adored, a son who filled him with wonder, and a large extended family that made every day meaningful. His ranch was more prosperous than it had ever been. He had purpose and connection and love beyond measure. One afternoon in April, exactly a year after Chayton had first arrived with his proposal, Henry and Winona stood on their porch watching Samuel sleep in a cradle one of the Apache craftsmen had made. The prairie was green and alive, wildflowers blooming in patches of color. The Apache camp was busy with spring activities, and the sound of children's laughter carried on the breeze. "A year ago today, your father rode up with his men," Henry said. "I was so nervous. I thought he might kill me or demand you come back and never see me again." "I was nervous too," Winona admitted. "I knew I loved you, but I did not know if we could make it work. The world seemed too broken, the divide between our peoples too wide." "And now?" Henry asked. "Now I know that love can bridge any divide," Winona said. "It is not easy. We still face prejudice and challenges, but we have built something real here, something lasting. We have proven that people can choose to live together in peace if they are willing to try." "We have," Henry agreed, pulling her close. "And we will keep building it, keep proving it, every day for the rest of our lives." As if in response to his words, Samuel began to stir, making the soft mewling sounds that meant he would soon be hungry. Winona went to pick him up, and Henry watched his wife hold their son, this perfect blend of two worlds, this embodiment of their love. He thought about the future, about the children they might have after Samuel, about the community they would continue to grow, about the bridges they would build between cultures. Life would not always be easy. He knew there would be hard times ahead, conflicts to navigate, prejudices to overcome. But he also knew they would face it all together, surrounded by family and bound by love stronger than any force that might try to tear them apart. The cowboy who had once been so lonely had found everything he had been searching for without even knowing he was searching. And the Apache girl who had been lost in a blizzard had found her home. Together, they had built something new and precious from the broken pieces of their divided world. Years passed, and the community on Henry Wallace's land continued to thrive and grow. By 1882, when Samuel was 4 years old, he had 2 younger siblings, daughters named Rose Sarah and Mary Casa, their names also honoring both heritages. The Apache band had grown as well, as word spread of this place where people could live in relative peace and prosperity. The relationship with Kearney had evolved into something approaching mutual respect. Henry had become an unofficial mediator between the town and the Apache community. When conflicts arose, people came to him to help find solutions. His ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, a testament to what could be accomplished when different knowledge and skills were combined. Chayton had aged gracefully, his hair now fully silver, but his mind remained sharp and his spirit strong. He spent most of his days with his grandchildren, passing on the stories and traditions of the Apache people. He had told Henry once that he had made the right choice that day he arrived with his proposal, that he could not have hoped for a better husband for his daughter or father for his grandchildren. Winona had blossomed into a confident woman who moved easily between both worlds. In the mornings, she might be in traditional Apache dress, teaching her daughters the beadwork and plant lore of her people. In the afternoons, she might be in a simple calico dress, riding into town with Henry to conduct business. She had become a leader in her own right, respected by both communities. On a warm summer evening in 1885, the entire community gathered for a celebration. Samuel was 7 now, a bright boy who spoke both English and Apache fluently and loved to read books as much as he loved to ride horses. Rose was 5, a spirited girl with her mother's beauty and her father's stubbornness. Mary was 3, quieter than her siblings but observant and clever. They were celebrating the completion of a new school building that would serve both the Apache children and the white children from nearby farms. It had been Henry's idea, proposed to the town council after much deliberation, and surprisingly, it had been approved. Chayton had helped design it, incorporating both traditional and modern elements. It stood now at the edge of Henry's property, close enough to both communities, a symbol of cooperation and hope. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, people from town mingled with the Apache families. There were still some who stayed separate, who could not or would not overcome their prejudices, but they were fewer now. Most had come to see the value in what this community had built. Henry stood with Winona, watching their children play with a mixed group of Apache and white kids, all of them laughing and running without any sense of the divisions that had once seemed insurmountable. Chayton approached them, moving a bit slower these days but still strong. "You have done well, my children," Chayton said, looking at the scene before them. "This is what I dreamed of when I made my proposal to you all those years ago, Henry. a place where both peoples could live in dignity and peace. You have made it real. We have made it real, Henry corrected gently. All of us together. It was never just Winona and me. It has been the whole community, choosing every day to work together instead of against each other. True, Chayton agreed, but you and Winona were the seed from which all this grew. Your love was the foundation. He smiled and added, I am grateful that Blizzard brought my daughter to your door. The spirits work in mysterious ways. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the children were asleep, Henry and Winona sat on their porch as they did most evenings. The cabin had been expanded again over the years and was now a comfortable home with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a large living area where the family gathered. But they still loved their porch time, these quiet moments to reflect and connect. Do you remember the first time we sat out here together? Henry asked. You were still healing, still uncertain about whether you could trust me. I remember, Winona said. I was so scared but trying not to show it. You were so kind, but I had learned that kindness from white men often came with conditions. And now I know that real kindness has no conditions, Winona said. Now I know that love can overcome fear. Now I know that I am the luckiest woman alive to have found you, to have built this life with you. Henry took her hand and kissed it. I am the lucky one. You saved me, Winona. I did not even realize how lost I was until you showed me what it meant to truly be found. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear Samuel having a dream conversation, Mary giggling in her sleep, Rose's gentle snoring. These sounds of their children, safe and happy and loved, were the sweetest music either of them had ever heard. What do you think the future holds? Winona asked. For our children, for this community? I think it holds whatever we build into it, Henry said. The world is changing. It will keep changing. But if we can teach our children to see past differences, to value all people, to choose love and cooperation over fear and division, then they will build an even better future than what we have created. You are very wise, husband, Winona said with a smile. I learned from the best, wife, Henry replied, pulling her close. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Chayton passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1888, surrounded by family. The loss was profound, but he had lived to see his grandchildren grow strong and his daughter happy. He had achieved his goal of finding a middle path for his people, and his legacy lived on in the thriving community. Henry and Winona's children grew into remarkable young people. Samuel became a teacher in the school his parents had built, dedicated to educating both Apache and white children. Rose became a skilled horse trainer, combining techniques from both cultures. Mary, the quiet observer, became a writer, documenting the stories and history of the community for future generations. More children came to Henry and Winona. 2 more sons they named Thomas Currock and Daniel Nanton. Their home was always full of noise and laughter, of the blending of languages and traditions, of love that knew no boundaries. The community continued to grow and prosper. By the early 1890s, it had become a model that other regions looked to, proof that integration and cooperation were possible. Visitors came from other territories to see how they had made it work, and Henry and Winona welcomed them, shared their story, offered advice and encouragement. The ranch had expanded significantly, now employing both Apache and white workers who labored side by side. The school had grown to accommodate more students. A small church had been built that incorporated both Christian and Apache spiritual traditions, led by a progressive minister who believed that God spoke to all people, regardless of race or culture. In the the spring of 1895, as Henry approached his 41st birthday and Winona her 36th, they took a rare day off from their responsibilities and rode out to the spot where Henry had first found Winona in the snow, 17 years earlier. It was a journey they made once a year, a pilgrimage of sorts, to remember where they had started. They stood in the place that had changed both their lives, now green and alive with spring growth, so different from that deadly white landscape of long ago. Henry put his arm around his wife, and she leaned into him, as comfortable in his embrace as if they had been made to fit together. 17 years, Henry mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. The best 17 years of my life, Winona said. Every moment with you, every challenge we have overcome, every child we have raised, every bridge we have built, it has all been worth it. Would you do it all again? Henry asked. Knowing how hard it would be, how much work, how many people would doubt us or oppose us. Without hesitation, Winona said firmly. Would you? In a heartbeat, Henry replied. You are my heart, Winona. You and our children and this community we have built. This is what I was meant to do, who I was meant to be. I just did not know it until a blizzard brought you to me. They kissed there in that spot, the same passion and love they had felt as newlyweds still burning bright after all these years. Love had not made their lives easier, but it had made their lives meaningful. It had given them purpose and joy and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As they rode back to their home that evening, they could see the lights of the community spread out below them. Smoke rose from chimneys, both in the ranch house and in the Apache lodges. Children were playing in the last light of day. Horses grazed in the pastures. Gardens were being tended. People were living, working, loving, growing, all together in this place that had seemed impossible not so long ago. Henry and Winona had proven that love could bridge any divide, that people of different backgrounds could build a life together, that hope was stronger than fear. Their story had started with loneliness and loss, but had grown into something beautiful and lasting. They rode home to their family, to their community, to the life they had built with courage and faith and love. The cowboy was no longer lonely, and the lost Apache girl had found her way home. Together, they had created something that would endure, a testament to the power of love to transform not just two hearts, but an entire world. The sun set over the Nebraska prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and in the gathering twilight, the sounds of home rose up warm and welcoming. This was their legacy, their gift to the future. A place where love had conquered hate, where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where two people from two worlds had become one family and shown that anything was possible when hearts chose love over fear. And so they lived, Henry and Winona Wallace, surrounded by their children and their community, building their future one day at a time, bound together by a love that had been forged in hardship and tempered by time into something unbreakable. Their story, which had begun in a winter blizzard of desperation, had become a spring of hope that would flow forward for generations to come, watering the seeds of peace and understanding wherever it reached. This was their happily ever after, earned through struggle and sacrifice, celebrated in the everyday moments of a life well lived together, a love that had changed the world, starting with their own hearts and rippling outward to touch everyone around them. The lonely cowboy and the lost Apache girl had found each other, and, in doing so, had found themselves and shown others the way forward. Their love story became legend in Nebraska, told and retold around fires and dinner tables, an inspiration to anyone who wondered if love could truly conquer all. And the answer, lived out in the lives of Henry and Winona Wallace, and the community they built, was always and forever yes.